I'm Professor Stephen Cook. Hello. What happens when a door is opened, but no one is there to step through? Edward Hopper's Rooms by the Sea is an image of stark absence, an empty room, a gaping doorway, and the vast, unbounded sea. There is no visible human presence, and yet we feel drawn in. We feel ourselves standing at the threshold. We sense an invitation. But an invitation to what? This painting is often described in terms of isolation. Yet I want to suggest another reading. Maybe this is not a scene of despair, but of transformation, renewal, an image of kenosis, the act of self-emptying, that paradoxically makes space for transcendence and renewal. And in this, it echoes one of the most profound biblical texts on divine humility, emptying, and redemption, Isaiah 53, the poetic prophecy of the suffering servant. He was despised and rejected, someone of sorrows, acquainted with grief. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us shalom, and with his wounds we are healed. Hopper's Rooms by the Sea offers us a paradox of absence and presence. The room is empty, yet light floods in. It is as though the presence of the unseen sun has intensified. Similarly, Isaiah's suffering servant undergoes radical self-reduction, not for his own sake, but for others. He is despised, stricken, emptied of all semblance of earthly glory. And yet, his very kenosis, this radical self-retraction, becomes the means of life-giving empowerment and transformation. His suffering is not in vain. It enlivens those who grasp its meaning. Hopper's composition makes the door feel impossibly open, a crisp threshold separating the mundane interior from the vast, transcendent sea. This moment of divine liminality, where the material world and the spiritual world touch, intersect, come together. Isaiah 53 describes the suffering servant as a figure who stands in such a place between realms, between divine justice and human frailty, between rejection and restoration. His self-emptying is the open door through which redemption floods in. Hopper himself called this painting a jumping-off point. But not a jumping off into despair. It's about stepping beyond into something new. The door leads directly to water, water that calls to mind, for me, baptism, rebirth, the Spirit of God that hovered over the waters of chaos at the time of creation. For Isaiah, the suffering servant carries the weight of suffering so that others may walk through the door into new life. He empties himself so that we may be filled. There is a final mystery here. Is the empty room empty at all? Hopper was fascinated by what a space becomes when no one whatsoever is looking. Yet, just as the presence of sunlight makes itself known without light being able to be seen, so too does divine presence manifest through absence. In Isaiah 53, the servant is described as someone despised and rejected, but through his wounds becomes the agent of redemption. His absence from worldly power becomes the source of cosmic renewal, just as kenosis allows God's presence to flood in, makes room for God. Hopper's Rooms by the Sea shows us how emptiness makes room for light, how self-retraction is not loss, but invitation. Standing at this threshold, we feel that we could step through, that we could walk on the water. This is the paradox of divine kenosis. To step into radical self-giving is not to be emptied into oblivion, but to be filled with something beyond oneself, beyond the material. The suffering servant of Isaiah 53 stepped into rejection and loss only to become the vessel through which redemption flowed in. Hopper's Rooms by the Sea captures this moment for me, this open door where light and vastness call to us. It is not a space of isolation, but of presence. Not an ending, but an invitation to step out, to let ourselves be emptied so that we may be filled with something much greater than ourselves. He poured out his soul to death, yet he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. Isaiah 53:12.